virtually every top performer, they might have an anchor idea. It might be, well, I use a lot of Challenger, or I use a lot of MedPick, or I use what have you, but it's really, they're students of the craft. They're reading a lot. They're listening to these types of interviews, and they're looking for those nuggets. They're looking for, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let me try that. And over time, you build your system.
My name's Chris Bussing. Welcome to my podcast. It's committed to helping more people create lives of freedom and impact through success in tech sales and the pursuit of self-development. Man, do I have a good guest today, Scott Ingram. He's been a quota-carrying seller at top companies like Oracle and others. Like, what's your current company that you're at?
Yeah, so current company's Relationship One. I've worked for ADP. I've been with two companies that have gone public, both Bizarre Voice and Eloqua. So Eloqua was, we were a public company for one whole quarter. And then we were acquired by Oracle. So 2 exits within 4 or 5 months on that one.
Wow. I mean, talk about an amazing hands-on sales career that's still going. But Scott has also launched his Sales Success Stories podcast. And when I say launch, he's been doing it for a long time, 8 to 9 years, right?
Yep.
He's brought on the best of the best, including past guests like Brandon Fluharty, Ian Cognac, and Jamal Raymer that are top thought leaders, speakers, authors. This guy's helped launch their careers, and he also has a Sales Success Summit. So this conversation really is a treat. I want to encourage you to listen fully, to take notes, and share this conversation with more people who could benefit from the message and enjoy learning about what it takes to succeed in enterprise tech sales at the highest levels, and also some of the benefits of starting a podcast and growing from a marketing perspective as well. With that, Scott, thanks so much for being here. And I'd love to start out with your journey getting into tech sales. And first, we can focus on your actual career as a seller.
Sure. So I actually started my career as an entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was 21 years old. For Breaking Bad fans, if you were into that show, the name of the company was actually Gray Matter Technologies, which was the same company that Walter White worked for.
I love that.
Discovered this years later. I'd sold the company, so I had no connection to it anymore, but kind of a fun thing. I ran that company for 5 years, sold it before moving to Austin. And when I came to Austin, was kind of at this inflection point, right? Like fresh start, new place. I grew up in Southern California, right? That's where I started the first company. And I thought, what do I want to do? I'd been on kind of this entrepreneurial path. And I realized what I liked most was I just loved the sales part. And so I thought, you know what? I'm just going to focus on that. Running a company is rewarding and challenging and all of those things, and you're responsible for everything. And some of those everything I'm not great at. Yeah. I'm not the greatest at finance and accounting, and I'm maybe not the greatest on the HR side and things like that. So just this idea of, if I can just focus on the sales piece, that's really rewarding and fulfilling to me. And so that's where the adventure began. I first went to ADP and had a really great experience there. Learned an awful lot, and I'm not sure at what point I decided this, but at some point I decided I'm going to be an intentional individual contributor. So rather than pursuing the leadership path, which I think a lot of people think, oh, that's the default. What you should do is you should be a seller for a while, and then naturally you get promoted and you're a manager and you're a VP and all these things. And I thought, you know what? I love being frontline. I love working directly with my customers. I joke, I already have children, so I'm not so interested in leading a team.
Yeah.
And so I just decided, and you talked about freedom as a part of sales. You don't get a lot of freedom when you're in management. You don't control your calendar as much as I control my calendar as an individual contributor. So that was the choice that I made, and then it's been just kind of a crazy, interesting adventure from there. Like I said, a couple of years at ADP, went to Bizarre Voice, had kind of my first IPO experience working with a very fast-growing startup. Eloqua was a very similar adventure to that. I joke I tolerated Oracle after that acquisition for 7 months or so. Because one of the things I've learned about myself over time is I don't love working for giant organizations. Like I like the nimbleness that comes from a little bit smaller organization. So just, over time, you have these experiences, you learn about yourself, you understand what types of companies you enjoy working for, you enjoy who you like selling to, which I think is a super important overlooked thing. I've sold to a lot of different parts of the organization over the years, and my people are in sales and marketing by and large, right? I mean, I've sold to finance, I've sold to HR, I've sold to IT. And again, not that I don't get along with those folks, but the optimists in the organization live in sales and marketing, right? They're forward looking, they're top line, and that's where I enjoy having an impact.
Speaking of impact, you're driving over 50% of your current company's revenue, right? You told me that in a one-off conversation. Like, how do you pull that off? Like, what are some of the keys to, operating at such a high level to drive that much revenue?
In this case, I think a lot of it is just consistency. There's one of the things that I mentor people around is the path that is their career. And I think sometimes it makes sense to move quickly, right? And make a pivot, make a change every 2 or 3 years. Other times, I think we overlook the value in longevity. And it's actually something that anecdotally I looked at a couple of years ago at the summit. So just to provide a little bit more context around sales success stories, I only interview active quota-carrying individual contributors they're the number one top performers in their organizations, or I'm willing to settle for the top 1%. So every now and then I'll interview somebody that's number 4 on a team of 800. We'll call that good enough. And so at the summit one year, I was looking at the trajectories of the 100 or so people that I'd had on the podcast to that point. And I wanted to understand, where have they gone and what has happened since then? And, many of them were in the same organizations. Some of them moved to similar organizations and to similar roles. Some took entrepreneurial paths. Many went down leadership paths. What was interesting to me, though, was those that continued to sell directly. A good number of them struggled after performing at the highest level with one organization, moved to another organization, and didn't get to the same level, or it took them a very long time to get to that same level. And I think a big part of the reason for that is it takes time to learn an organization, their process, and especially as you get into enterprise sales. More than 50% of that effort is internal work. This is a question I ask of a lot of the enterprise sellers that I have. And again, it's like, what percentage of your effort is client-facing versus internal? And by and large, it's always north of 50%, sometimes 60, maybe even 70%.
Wow.
And so understanding how your organization works, because really the role at that level becomes, how do I wield my organization and all of the resources it contains in support of my customer or future customer, right? And so it takes time just to understand, how do you make that work? There's a lot of relationships at play. There's a lot of just systems and processes, and where do I go to get this? How do I make this happen for my client? They got stuck here. We're having this particular issue. It just takes time to figure that out. And I think it's easy to dismiss that. It's easy to undervalue just how important that is, and it takes time to build that back up. So a big part of my current success, I've been with the same company for 8.5 years. I've got incredible relationships. I know how to wield this organization in support of my clients incredibly effectively, and the relationships. I'm in a fairly small niche kind of environment, so it's a very small world. And I'm a known entity, right? There's a lot of trust that's been built up over the years. So I at this stage in my career, I don't really make cold calls, right? It's almost all by introduction, because I have an incredible referral network, because I've built up a lot of trust and helped deliver on behalf of many clients over many years.
And so that's the goal, is to get to your level where we're, impacting 50% of revenue, and we don't have to pick up a phone ever again for a cold call. I mean, if we're picking up the phone, it's a warm call.
Exactly.
Or you're getting introduced. And I mean, how long did it take you in your career, looking back, to get to a point where you had such a robust network that you're just like able to, you have like tentacles spread all over the place and you just can get in there warm?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of part of my superpower from day one. I mean, when I sold my first company, I made 3 phone calls to make that happen because I already kind of had the network. And so it's been a really core way to the way that I have always operated in sales. So many of my opportunities, both career opportunities and client new business opportunities, have come through my network because I put a ton of energy into it. But, to really answer that question, it's easily 5 or 10 years of doing that kind of work to build the reputation, to build the trust. And that's assuming that you're not making dramatic industry changes, right? I've been for the last probably 15 years kind of in this marketing technology space. So, had I switched to something different, I may not be able to leverage a lot of those relationships. In many ways, you're almost starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Not completely from scratch. So it's a process. I mean, I think it really takes patience. And if you do it right, sales gets easier, more profitable, and more fun the longer you do it, if you're doing it right.
I love that.
But the beginning's not like that.
It's like you show me what's possible. I'm 10 years in. And to your point, you're like, oh, it took 5 to 10 years. I'm starting to really experience the network. It's grown, and I'm getting a lot more warm intros. I still have a long way to go, especially to get to your level. But I am experiencing that power of just getting really connected. And I just want to encourage anyone out there in the audience to just be patient, as you described, and be consistent and give it time. Because if you nurture a sales career and go all out for 10 years, like, what do you think? You can be making like really good money, like, And...
Well, here's the thing about the money too. I think one of the things I've learned from having all of these conversations over the years is the money's a way big deal in the beginning. Once you get to a certain point, like once you get fairly comfortable and stable, it's less about the money, but and part of that, and it's like a reverse psychology thing. I think as soon as you stop worrying about the money really starts to come. Because at the end of the day, if there's anything I've learned from all of these interviews, is the very best who have the biggest W-2s and the biggest incomes, they're the least focused on that, and they're the most focused on their customers. And so that W-2, the position on on the leaderboard, is a side effect of having done an amazing job in serving their customers and just doing a great job in their territory, right? But I also want to go back to the building of the network thing, right?
Yes, because I was going to ask you, like, distill your superpower, like some of the mechanics behind it. Particularly, I think of Manal, who I just met at the Google office today. He's an SDR in select accounts. So he's covering, we don't have NDAs, but like MasterCards of the world, right? And he was asking for some advice. And I'm like, this conversation I'm going to share with him because I'm sure there's some insight into how you build your network and create inroads. So take it where you may, but yeah, I wanted you to go there.
Yeah, there's a lot of angles, right? There is there's a Harvard Business Review article that I think did the best job of really encapsulating all of the dynamics of this. So if you search for HBR, like Harvard Business Review, sales network, something along those lines, you should be able to find this article. And it talked about there's probably 4 different dynamics of the way that you wield a network in a powerful way within sales. And I think we tend to focus on one way, where we want a network that's going to help us open the doors and create more opportunities, right? And that's important.
And that's what he was actually asking about. So good point. Yeah.
So, but that's only one way. But we also need to be mindful of our own careers and our own future opportunities. It may be different than sales opportunities, but if you can take a big step in your career, that's way more impactful than even landing a really large new client, right?
Yes.
There's the network that is what we talked about before, which is the relationships that I have inside of my organization so that I can better serve and deliver on behalf of my clients. And then there's kind of the existing client, existing customer network that if you do a good job there, that creates opportunities for you to create your own references, and those are introductions and referrals and other things that sort of come. So you have to think about all of those pieces. So the obvious piece is, yes, I want to have a good network in the market that I'm selling to. In that specific example, I'm selling to a large organization. That's not one person. A large organization, you're going to have many dozens, hundreds of stakeholders. So how do you build relationships across that organization and have people refer and introduce you internally? Right? So that's one piece.
Yes.
The other piece I think is just massively important is, again, those relationships that you have inside of your organization. What happens over time is if you do a good job and you have a great reputation inside your organization, you become very visible, and a lot of people across that organization know you. Now, if that company happens to be fast growing and they're on an IPO track, you've got a lot of very high potential people who are going to have incredible careers. So part of what I benefit from these days is people that I worked with 20 years ago in a startup are now leading another organization, right? So we don't think about that dynamic, but over time, they're going to get promoted. They're going to get to more and more senior positions. And if you've done a good job of maintaining those relationships, staying top of mind, it's going to create more opportunities for you. So they're at another place. Maybe they're not even on the sales team. This goes beyond your peers in sales. This might be somebody that was on the marketing team. This might be somebody that was in customer success. This might be somebody that was on the product team, and they go to some new fast-growing startup and they're like, how do we do this sales thing? Like, why don't we just call Scott? I worked with this guy who's absolutely incredible. I think he'd be great at this.
Yes.
Those are the types of things that start to happen. Again, it takes time, and you have to feed and nurture all of those relationships.
I just picture like planting seeds, especially early in your career, and watering them over time, even midway. And I got chills. You couldn't see it, and the audience probably can, just seeing what you described, because I see the possibilities for myself, and I'm sure the audience does too. And it's like, you're the proof that just hang in there. And like, I mean, that's not even the right term, right? Because you were thriving. You're not more than hanging in there. You're actively building meaningful connections, and it's just powerful. So my mind wants to go in a few different directions, but I'm landing on this one. Once you establish a new connection, say Manal that we were talking about, he starts to create some good inroads at these great companies or even tangential partners, and it has a good network. What goes into really building meaningful connections, the type that are going to really generate opportunities in the future? And of course, it's not all transactional in business. It's also like, I'm sure, friendships, right, that you've had. So how do you nurture relationships over time? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's I used to speak a lot about networking. I actually started a networking organization in Austin when I first came here, because I knew, like, this is going to be my future. So how do
No wonder you and Tom Singer,
Correct.
who's been on the channel, are friends.
Yes.
You two are just incredible at that.
Yeah. And so somebody once asked me, they're like, when is it too late? So you lose touch with somebody. There's somebody that you want to have a relationship with. You made an initial connection, or you had a relationship, or you worked together, but now it's been years. How do you reestablish that? And I said, relationships aren't like milk. They don't go bad. And there's two sides to every relationship. So if today, I had lunch with somebody I haven't seen in 4 years.
Yeah.
And we picked up right where we left off. But there's, again, I reached out to him and we decided to get together. But I'm not the only reason we hadn't talked in 4 years. He hadn't talked to me either. So it's recognizing that, and recognizing there's value in just reaching out and continuing to have those. And you don't have to overthink this. It's just the little touches. And ideally, you're doing this in a way where you're not only reaching out when you need something.
Amen.
Right? If you only hear from me every 4 years, and every 4 years I ask you for a favor, that's not so cool. Right? So you have to kind of be thinking about, what are these relational deposits that I'm making, and can I just check in on somebody? It's like, hey, we haven't talked in forever. how's it going? Catch me up. What are you working on?
Yes.
And maybe there's something that they talk about in the course of that conversation where I can make an introduction for them, or I can recommend a resource, or hey, I read a book about that might be helpful. It's little stuff. It takes very, very little effort typically for you to add a lot of value.
Such a good call out to not only reach out when you're asking for help. Do you know Dean Zarilla? He's a friend. Okay, he's a local former tech seller that's exited 3 companies, and he's a friend of Tom's as well. So that's why I wondered. But he mentioned someone specifically in his network that only reaches out when he needs help. And he's like, oh boy, here's this person. They're just caught up on themselves. But what you're saying is you can find ways to contribute, and simply maybe that's just checking in and being curious. So I'm curious, when it comes to practically managing your network, do you have a Rolodex or like a Google Sheet? Because someone actually asked me like how I manage my network, and I'm like, oh, that could be interesting, you know. And I actually have done this, and I'd love your feedback as the true master. I have certain people and maybe some personal nuggets on their kids, and they're into this and that, and just when was the last time we spoke? But is it more, how do you manage your network? I bet you have a huge network.
Yeah. Honestly, like at this stage, I would say not well. I broke LinkedIn in a way that made sense for me a number of years ago. So, I mean, I've been on LinkedIn forever.
22K followers or something. It might be more, but it's a good number of followers.
So my philosophy on LinkedIn for years was I only connect with people that I have an actual relationship with. And so until I broke that, LinkedIn was the way that I managed it. And a lot of what I would do a couple of times a year, I would export my entire network, and I would just look at the spreadsheet, and I would kind of go through and think about, who do I want to connect with? Who do I want to reach out to? And so I would just sort of go through that process on a regular basis. Now, the pivot for me, again, it made sense at the time, and at a time where the LinkedIn algorithm was very, very friendly. And so and partially because of the podcast and the audience that I had, right? I'm at a place where my relationships are sort of asymmetric, because I might not know you, and you might have listened to hundreds of hours of me talking with people.
And they feel like they know you.
So they have a relationship with me where I don't have a relationship with them.
That's interesting.
It's a weird dynamic. Yeah. So I kind of opened the floodgates, and I got much, much, much more permissive in my connections. Because again, tons and tons of people were reaching out because, hey, Scott, I've heard you on the podcast. I love your show, yada, yada. And I didn't want to not have that connection for them. But it's made the management of my network that much harder.
Yeah.
I've become less valuable to my network because of that. Because in the old days of Scott, Chris would reach out and say, hey, Scott, is there any way that you know Tom? I would love an introduction. Well, of course, I know every person in my network. Now you reach out and you're like, do you know this random person? No, I have no idea. Maybe they've listened to hundreds of hours of me. I don't know, but I don't have any real relationship with them. So it's gotten personally harder for me, and I don't have a great tool.
Yeah, you know what? The positive for the world is they get to benefit from your content. You know, more people can follow you, so that's a plus.
That's become part of the approach, right? So it is kind of this asymmetric thing. And again, I've done a poor job of this lately, just because it became too distracting for me, and I'm very much about intentional focus. So I don't post on LinkedIn as much as I used to. Most of my world is B2B. Yeah. So virtually everybody professionally for me lives on LinkedIn. So there is an ability
I love LinkedIn.
To share updates. And even though you may not be individually staying in touch with someone, I mean, there were a lot of cases where, again, I'd have one of these conversations. I hadn't talked to somebody in a couple of years, but they were kind of up to speed on what was going on with me because they were consuming the content.
Yes.
So again, I'm not the poster child for how to manage that at this stage.
But this sparked some really cool thoughts on the asymmetry of relationships. I actually had never heard anyone put it that way, and there's pros and cons to it. Now, I think you used a term a few times now. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it intentional focus? Is that the term?
Intentional focus, and I talked about intentional individual contributor before, but yeah, for sure.
Can you just this seems to be almost transcend sales. It's like part of who you are, and it's powerful. Like I think of, and I want to turn it over to you in a second, but I think of like Brendon Burchard and his book, High Performance Habits. Did you ever read that one?
Not that one. I'm familiar with Brendan.
Yeah, and so the high performers, whether it's like Usher or Oprah or business people, one of their things they do is they seek clarity, and it just makes me think of what you're saying. They're extremely intentional. So what does intentional focus at its core, even transcending like sales, mean to you?
So let's talk about a bigger lesson first, and then we'll get to the intentionality. So
perfect.
The question I get asked the most, having interviewed 180 or so Uber top performers.
That's awesome. 180. That's a huge accomplishment.
Is, okay, Scott, so like what's the secret to sales success? And
what a broad question.
Yeah, I mean, my short answer is the secret is there is no secret, right? I mean, there's foundational things that you're probably not going to like the answers to. Like, you're going to have to actually work really freaking hard at this. But there is a superpower theme. And the superpowers are individual. The superpower is about figuring out what are the things that either make you great or have the potential to make you great. And they're likely strengths. They're likely things that come very natural to you that you might even overlook because they're so natural. So we've talked about one of mine. One of mine is just the way that I manage relationships and have relationships and have been able to build trust over the years. The other is my productivity process. And so intentionality and focus and all of that is a huge, huge part of that. For your audience, and we can put this in the show notes too, if you go to top1.fm/BQ4P, I think, I've done a deep dive on this that is like an exhaustive, like hour-long, Scott, what the heck is your process? Because the next thing people ask me is knowing all that I do, like knowing that I carry a multi-million-dollar quota, knowing that I have a family, that I run Sales Success Media, that I'm doing all of this stuff.
It's a lot.
It's a lot. They're like, how do you do all of that?
That's funny. You took the question right out of my mind.
And so, like I said, if you really want the deep dive, there's an hour on it. And so a big part of it for me is it's a recognition that this is a superpower of mine, and it's something that I have developed and honed over years, right? There's a lot of trial and error and just understanding myself and understanding my rhythms and when am I productive and when am I not productive. And again, just what are the tools that help me manage the chaos and stay focused on all of these things. And so, one of those things a couple of years ago was LinkedIn is just a little bit of a black hole for me. And it's kind of all or nothing. Like, I haven't figured out a way to do it lightly. And so I just needed to kind of walk away from, I mean, I still use it certainly, but it's more in research and prep and understand, hey, I need to reach out to this person, what's going on with them from what I can learn kind of publicly. But I think the superpower thing is the more important of this, right? Sure, we can talk about productivity. We can talk about focus. There's great books on it. I don't remember Brendan's book specifically.
Yeah.
At one point, I went crazy and probably read 10 books on habits and all of these things.
Okay, I got to stop you real quick over a couple that you really liked, because that's always fun for homework in addition to your article.
Here's the brilliant part. Having read many on the topic, I think that James, help me out here.
James Clear, Atomic Habits, right?
He basically brought it all together in one book.
Oh.
So if you just read Atomic Habits, I think you'll get all of the important notes. I don't think you need to go a whole lot deeper than that. Yeah. He really did a good job of consolidating this idea. So there's a lot there, and productivity and finding your own process is super important, right? So it's not just productivity process, it's also what is your sales process, right? There's a lot of approaches out there, right? You can follow MedPick or you can follow Sandler or whatever it is.
Bant. I mean, actually, that's not really.
Yeah,
that's more qualification. Yeah.
But I mean, you can use that. Here's the most common answer that I get, because I ask this question in every interview, like, what is your philosophy? What is the system that you use? Virtually every top performer, they might have an anchor idea. It might be, well, I use a lot of Challenger, or I use a lot of MedPick, or I use what have you. But it's really, they're students of the craft. They're reading a lot. They're listening to these types of interviews, and they're looking for those nuggets. They're looking for, oh, that's an interesting idea. Let me try that. And over time, you build your system, right? So again, it comes back to the superpowers. And you have to find your way. It's the only path to success. Because if you try and put on the Scott Ingram suit, it's not going to fit. It's different. Your suit is a different thing. So that's probably the hardest thing. That's that hard work element of it's working on yourself. And really figuring out these things. There is no, unfortunately, I mean, one of the things I joke about, I've talked about this for years, I've done marathons and triathlons and things over time, and I can pick up a 12-week training plan, and it tells me exactly what to do on every day, and I'm going to be successful. I'm going to finish that race. Sales isn't like that. There's not the triathlon training plan for sales. It's too complex. It's too nuanced.
Yeah. How many variables are outside of our control in sales?
And there's a ton of that, right? So what that leads to, and ultimately where I spend most of my time when we come together at the summit, it's so foundational. It's so fundamental because the answer to that issue, the answer to, oh my God, there are so many things that are outside of my control, is, okay, what are you going to control? And more importantly, what's your mindset around it? What's your mindset around shit is going to go wrong? Deals are going to go sideways through no fault of yours. You can run a perfect process and something's going to happen.
I bet your time as an entrepreneur prepared you for the BS of sales, didn't it?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, it's just different kinds of BS, right? Part of the thing that, I mean, where I got sort of the first idea that I don't love working for, I love selling to giant organizations because I can add a lot of value for them in helping them break through the BS. I mean, what's crazy to me is I'll work across organizations and they don't realize that the challenge that they're having, one of their peers already solved in another division or another geography, but they don't even know each other. And all I have to do is connect them. And oh, by the way, they probably used my solution to do it. So this is going to be an easy sale in the future, right? I'm going to have my customer do that selling for me. But the working for large organizations, at one point I kind of looked because I was at ADP in the depths of the recession. And it was like bad news trickled down, and I sort of counted like how many times is this thing rolling and gaining momentum before it lands on me? And there were 8 people between me and the CEO of ADP. And I'm like, oh, no wonder this sucks. No wonder I spend 40% of my time documenting what I'm spending my time doing. Like, if you would just let me sell, I'll be able to do a little bit better. We may not be hitting our numbers, but I'll have 40% more time if I'm not doing TPS reports all the time.
Yeah. So someone like you who has that entrepreneurial spirit, fire in the belly, you just need to be at a place where you can be let loose and actually have the ability to make the level of impact you're capable of. And at a big company, as you described, you're so far removed from leadership and you're caught up in a lot of red tape, aren't you?
Yep.
So it's interesting that you just I almost knocked my mic over. Actually, it's pretty sturdy. You discovered that you loved selling to like marketing, right? Is it marketing and sales or just marketing?
It's both.
Okay.
I mean,
okay.
Yep.
So you found your people that you love to sell to. So that was a great insight. And also being at a company, and correct me if I'm wrong, where you actually can be unleashed to make the type of impact you want to make.
So let's talk about those dynamics. And I'm trying to figure out the best resource for it. I know I did a story in the first Sales Success Stories book. So we've also done a couple of books kind of within the community. We're
going to link it all in the description of the video.
One of those things I talked about was kind of one of my own stories that I contributed to that, and it was managing your career in really being clear about where do you want to go. And there's a lot of dynamics to that. And part of this was a networking lesson. Part of this was if you can get super clear and defined in what you're looking for, it's very easy to ask for that thing. But if you're asking more broadly, it's really hard for people to help you. So the specific example I give, I was at a networking event years and years ago, and one of these things, everybody stands up and introduces themselves. One person stood up and they said, "Hey, I'm a chiropractor. A good referral for me is anybody with a spine." I'm like, that narrows it down to like 98% of the people that I know.
Oh my gosh.
And then in that same meeting, somebody else stood up and said, "You know what? I would love the introduction to either the general manager or the owner of a cleaning company." That was so specific. I pulled out my phone. I looked up 3 people and their phone numbers and was able to give those to that person on the spot.
Wow.
How many referrals did the chiropractor get? Yeah, none.
Yeah.
So this idea with, and again, it takes time. It's the introspection. I was between jobs, kind of looking for the next thing, and I was able to really get clear about, I want to work for this size of company. And again, that's individual. If you need a lot of structure, and early in your career, I think this is actually helpful. I don't encourage people to go start for a brand new startup as their first job because you don't know anything. You already have to learn everything. And if you're in an organization that doesn't know anything, they're not going to be able to help you.
They're like counting on you to figure the shit out.
All of it. All of it. So if you work for a large organization that does have a lot of structure and does have good training, that's going to be really, really helpful to you figuring it out. And some people thrive on just give me the recipe. Like, give me a really clear playbook that I can go execute. Gartner is a great example of this. Like, if you plug into that system and you do what they ask you to do, you'll pretty much be successful. But that's not a good fit for me, right? I kind of have to find my own way. So I know that. I know who I want to sell to, both role and company size. Because there's a huge difference in selling to Fortune 500 companies versus selling to local SMB companies. Very, very, very different things. So the more that you can get clear about what are those things, and I've seen people be wildly successful in a more transactional role and try and become an enterprise seller because that's what you're supposed to do. It's just not it's not who they are. And they fail miserably and have a hell of a time and yet can go back into a more transactional thing and do amazingly because it fits them. So a huge part of this is figuring out what fits you. And you might not know, right? A lot of this is you have to learn by trial and error. Like, you might have to take a really crappy role and go, oh, okay, that is definitely the kind of culture I don't want to work for. That is the type of sales or the type of person I don't want to sell to, or this is the type of product I don't want to sell. The better you can understand those things, the more successful you're going to be.
Scott, this is gold for our audience of 20 to 30-something sellers based on the data that are either aspiring, looking to break into tech sales so that they can understand how to think about what specifically they want for their career to start their tech career, or the SDRs who reach out to me and are like, hey, I want to go to a better company, or even AEs. So that was gold right there. And I have probably a roadmap of 6 questions that popped into my brain, but I'm going to go with this one. You mentioned transactional versus maybe I'm going to put words in your mouth like transformational deals, like larger enterprise, complex deals. Can you paint a picture of the leap from transactional to transformational? Like maybe paint a picture of the complexity of like the types of large deals that someone like yourself or at the highest levels like Brandon Fluharty, who we'll talk about later. Yep. What does that look like?
Yeah. I mean, the leap is huge. I mean, they're so different. I mean, if you think about a more traditional transactional type of sale, I'm assuming this is maybe a couple $1,000s. You likely have 1, maybe 2 points of contact. Your sales cycle it's probably a couple of weeks, maybe a month at most, likely even shorter than that.
Yes.
A transformational type of sale could literally be years. Yeah. Right? It might be an 18-month process. You are likely working with a very large, complex organization. You are touching so many parts of that organization. So remember, I'm selling primarily to sales and marketing. That doesn't mean I'm not working with finance and procurement. I'm working with legal. I'm working with potentially their product team, their technical team, because we're doing data and security.
Look at all
reviews.
that. You're hitting all the departments.
You're touching a lot of different parts of the business. You might also be touching lots of parts of the world, right? So I work with a lot of global accounts. And so a lot of my early morning calls are me talking to somebody in Europe. And we're working through things that are happening there. So what happens? I think if you think of it as just the number of inputs and the number of outputs, right? So in a transactional deal, you might have one or two inputs on the left side, and on the right side, in terms of your own organization and what you're delivering, you might have one or two kind of outputs, right? Maybe I need to connect them with one other person on my team, or maybe once they buy this, I hand it to them. Like, here's your thing. Congratulations. Goodbye. In the enterprise deal, you might be working with dozens, potentially hundreds of individuals in the prospect or client organization, and you might be working with dozens and even hundreds of individuals inside your own organization. And so with each additional input and output, imagine how many lines there are that could potentially connect. So it's exponentially more complicated.
You did such a good job, like painting a picture of the complexity, and something you hit on before, which was a great insight, is how much work you have to do working with your internal team to mobilize them on behalf of the customer. You mentioned the top performers are spending like over 50% on that. And I think I'm in a cloud services company and having to sell my engineering team on, shaving down the statement of work and the scope, and then working with the customer, and then my finance and legal, and then the departments of the customer. There's a lot of complexity. So I appreciate you painting that picture. I had a couple more things I wanted to hit on around your actual sales career, and then I wanted to take us home at focusing on the Sales Success Stories podcast and the Sales Success Summit. The first one is tactical. The next one is more broad. You mentioned, you're productive. It's a superpower, it sounds like. What's maybe like a key productivity hack that you implement? Maybe it's like a habit every day. Because you did mention getting away from LinkedIn. That was actually a very practical tip. But any others? You could give us more than one. It's up to you.
Yeah. Again, there's tons. I think the most important part, I have sort of a process when I start my day that is essentially a triage. And so what I'm doing is, and this is originally inspired by David Allen's Getting Things Done. Yeah. So I've kind of adopted, and again, it's you understand the big framework. Once you study the big picture, it's okay. What parts of this are relevant to me? How do I adopt it so my suit fits? So it really begins with, okay, let me just kind of go through everything. I'm an inbox zero guy. I have multiple inboxes. So I got that one to inbox zero. I got that one to inbox zero.
Okay, and by the way, for the audience, in case someone doesn't know the term, because I do, what does inbox zero mean?
Yeah, so inbox zero basically means you're getting your actual inbox to have no emails in it.
This is crazy. I'm so far from that.
And so what then happens is my core folder structure is I have an action folder, I have a waiting for folder, I have a future folder, and I have a today folder. So essentially the process is something will go into my future folder if it is an action, but it's not something I actually need to do something about for another at least a week. The action folder these are things that likely need an action from me probably in the next week. Waiting for there's more to be done here, but I'm waiting for somebody else to do something before I can take my next step. And I need to make sure that I don't lose sight of that, because if they don't do that thing and this falls off, then I lose a whole bunch of traction. So you can think of the waiting for folder as almost a follow-up folder. Right, so it's kind of like, oh, hey, Chris, you were going to send me this thing. I don't have it from you yet. Can you get that to me today? That's essentially.
I got a customer right now.
The waiting for.
I need a countersigned NDA. That's an example.
Exactly. Now, so once I get to inbox zero, everything's in one of those, or they're just archived, right? If they're not in one of those 4 folders, then what happens is I'm looking at the action folder and the waiting for folder to figure out what moves to today. So the beauty of this is, speaking of focus, I don't have thousands of emails sitting in my inbox staring at me, and I'm like, how do I deal with this abyss of
I'm convicted,
madness?
like a church, the productivity church.
And all I have to worry about is these 15 emails that are in my today folder, and I can knock them out. Right?
That's good.
So that process is happening again across multiple inboxes because I'm doing multiple things.
Yeah.
I'm going through my calendar. I'm looking at primarily yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So I'm looking at yesterday to see, hey, is there anything that I missed that I need to follow up or take an action on today? Today, I'm obviously looking at kind of my meetings and like, am I fully prepped for everything? Is everything ready to go? Have I confirmed those meetings? All of those kinds of things. And then I'm looking ahead to tomorrow and maybe the next day after that to make sure, is there anything I need to significantly prep for that I might need to start on today, or things that I need to start kind of pulling together from that perspective? I'm also kind of keeping a to-do list. So the inbox serves as a little bit of a to-do list, but then I've got sort of a master to-do action list. And once I've done this triage, once I've sort of looked at, okay, I've cleared my inboxes and my text messages and my voicemails, and I've kind of gotten everything kind of cleared away, then I can look at how much space do I have today? So part of looking at the calendar is understanding, well, how much actual time do I have to do work? If I have a day that is just wall-to-wall meetings, then what I'm looking at from an action perspective is what absolutely has to get done today. Yes. And that's probably all that's actually going to happen because I'm just consumed. Other days, I might have more white space. I'm like, oh, sweet, I've got 2, 3, 4 hours to work with. Awesome, today's a crank day. And then again, I'm going through kind of a prioritization process to figure out like what are the most important things that I can get knocked out today. So that was maybe a little bit more than I expected to do. But
this has
it's,
been an
it's
unbelievably inspiring and insightful conversation packed with value. And we're going to link that. It was an article, right? We're going to get that in the show notes.
Like so, there's a full video, with screenshots and links to resources and all kinds of stuff in there.
Okay, cool. And by the way, I've lost track of time, so I'll take a quick peek at where we're at. I don't even know, but I want to kick off our next question as well in parallel. This is the final one related to your own journey in sales. And then we're going to bring her home again with this podcast that you built, which is amazing, in the Sales Success Summit. So I feel like tech sales is a bull. You hop on and might even buck you off. Some people get bucked off earlier in their career. Some, later on in their career, meaning you get let go or something happens at the organization. I've seen it at Oracle and Google. They eliminate a business unit. There's a lot of reasons. Jamal Raymer, who's someone you had on your podcast, and I had on mine as well, and you actually really impacted his career. This guy's a beast. He told me in the podcast he was fired for underperformance 2 years in a row, and then he ascended to become the author of Mega Deal Secrets and come on your podcast, which means he was the number one guy. And so...
Not just a little bit number one, too. Like
$50 million
deals, $50 million deals.
Right? And so the point is, it's tying into the theme of, how have you managed to stay on the bull for, 25 years? And, in a field where people get bucked off all the time.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the bull analogy is kind of a good one. I think roller coaster, too, right? Because even within one role, I mean, the highs and lows are insane.
You're so right.
And it's maturity from that perspective that you just kind of start to learn how to deal with that and not get too high and not get too low, right? From a roller coaster perspective. I think in terms of staying in these roles, the first thing is understanding that your first couple of roles is going to be freaking hard. You know nothing. You have to learn everything, right? You don't have experience to lean on. And this is an emotionally challenging role. I mean, my first gig with ADP, on paper, I did great. It did not feel great at all. And it was super hard. And so I think, I'm going to say, I love alliteration and there's a lot of P words and S words in my world, but I think, patience, perspective and persistence are kind of the game, right? So the patient side, or maybe the perspective side, is recognizing and knowing and having the expectation this is going to be freaking hard, and just preparing yourself for that as much as you can, and knowing, and here's kind of where the persistence comes into play, knowing that you may fail, but if you have a single data point, like you failed in this one role and you got fired, was that you? Or was that the company or the job or the territory? Or, I mean, so what was really to blame? So I think in some ways you almost need to prepare yourself for this might actually take a couple of tries, and you shouldn't think of yourself as a failure. I wrote a chapter in that same Sales Success Stories book. I titled it, in the moment that this happened, I titled that chapter Fired Up. And I came up with the title for that chapter when I was in the garage with my box of stuff pulling away from the building after I got fired from Bazaar Voice.
Wow.
So it happens to everybody.
See, there you go. You, Jamal Raymer. And by the way, it's Raymer.
Raymer.
Oh gosh. Take it out of the tape. No, we'll keep it, right?
So again, things happen, but what saved me was that mindset. In that moment, I decided this happened for a reason. This wasn't me. This was just a situation, and I'm going to turn it into something even better. And I did.
Let's go. Fired up. I'll never forget that. That's that hit you in the moment, but what a great reframe. Fired up.
Yeah. Yeah. So fun double entendre. So again, like I think, and the last piece is the patience and just recognizing this is going to take a minute. Yeah. Like you're not going to be good at this, certainly not great at this in a minute, and probably not a year, and probably not a couple of years. Like this is going to take real work. The good news is you're on the beginning of the right path here. If you're listening to this, if you're listening to this show, it shows that you care, that you're investing some time in figuring this out. And that's probably a good pivot to talk about,
let's take her home.
Particularly the summit, right? So the evolution of sales success stories. I started the show because I am a student of sales. I read lots of books. I'm always trying to get better. And at the time, and this condition still persists to a degree, at the time I looked at what I was consuming and the books I was reading, and I thought, this is insane. Nearly all of this content I'm consuming comes from people who haven't carried a quota in, I don't know, on average, decades. And I thought, that's nuts. The world has changed a lot. It continues to change a lot. The number of channels, the number of distractions. Now we have AI. Did you sell when there was AI, right? When you wrote this book? And so I wanted to learn from the people who were the best of the best right now. Like, what are you, who's sitting in the same type of seat that I am, what are you doing? How are you figuring this out? So that's where it came from. That's where
I love
this
your passion,
idea
by the way. I can feel it.
Yeah, I'm only going to talk to the best. What I then realized over time is this podcast is freaking amazing for me.
Amen.
Because I get to meet all of these people. I get to talk with them.
How lucky am I to talk with you?
I get to build a relationship.
Yeah.
And how unfair is it for my guests because they don't know each other and they're not able to learn from each other and have these conversations? And how unfair is it for my audience who just has to sit there and hopefully I ask the right question, but they don't get to have this relationship? So I built the summit to fix that. I wanted these top performers to be able to learn from each other, because one of those ingredients, almost universally, they are also students of sales. They are also ravenously consuming this content and trying to figure out, how do I do this better? How do I get better? There's got to be a better way. So that ability to learn from each other, and then obviously for the audience, like, you don't have to be a top performer to come to the summit. I hope you want to be a top performer when you come to the summit and learn about this. And I actually had this epiphany this morning. I was just thinking about how unique the community that's built around the summit. It's super intimate. I mean, there's 150 people. And sales is, when you are networking with your peers who are in sales inside your same company, rarely do you find like real generosity. Like rarely do you find, I'm going to totally give you all of my secrets that are going to help you beat me. So people, they hold back, right? And there's just like, there's a lack of vulnerability because I don't want to share. I don't want to expose that weakness. I don't want my leadership to think that I don't know everything. And so you tend to get this really weird dynamic. The summit is amazing because we're all just there to learn from each other. And the level of support and mentorship, and I mean, it's career accelerant. Because you've got people who are 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years ahead of you who've been down the road, who can say, hey, Scott, watch out. Like, once you turn this next bend, there's a big pothole. So just stay to the left.
That's
it's
powerful.
Really hard to get. It's really hard to get. Or the, hey, you know what? I've just got a jet ticket for you, right? If you just walk up to this counter, let me make an introduction for you, and we're going to get you into a better role and into a better position that fits you better. That's where the real passion is for me, is changing the trajectory of people's careers.
Changing the trajectory of people's careers, and not just their careers, their broader life, right? Seriously.
By extension,
like that,
for sure.
By extension, and Sales Success Summit is, it's not like other events. You know, it's an intimate community with people that want to lift others up and share without holding back. And is there anything else you'd add in terms of like what makes this special? And in addition to that, I'm going to want you to share like the details,
Sure.
And we're going to link it for the audience as well.
So I think the experience is a really big part of it. Part of it is, so the only people I allow on the stage are the people who've been on the podcast. So that's the criteria.
Yeah.
So
Brandon Fluharty's coming on, right?
Brandon's coming. So I interviewed Brandon when he was still selling. Right. So I interviewed Brandon when he was at Live Person and closing mega deals and pulling in 7-figure a year incomes.
Yeah.
And Brandon came to me, and this is such an honor. Brandon reached out to me earlier this year, and Brandon is, you think I'm intentional, Brandon is a whole nother level of just his level of intentionality. So he was kind of planning out his year, and he's like, I'm going to speak publicly one time this year. Scott, can I do it with you at the summit?
Wow.
So that's it. Like, if you want to see Brandon this year and be in a room with him, and again, the beauty is if you go if you go to any type of typical sales conference, most of the people presenting have some sort of agenda. They're trying to sell you their coaching program or their book or what have you. The vast majority of the people that are here with us, as soon as they finish talking, are going to sit back down in one of the seats and take probably more furious notes than you are, because they're trying to sharpen their own tools and get that much better. And so you also don't get a lot of this, like, speakers that come in, they speak, and they're gone. Like, everybody is here. Brandon will be there for all 2 days and beyond, right? So there's an opportunity to have real meaningful conversations. That's a bit, it's the who. Like, the magic ingredient for me is just putting the most amazing people I can find together in one room at the same time, and magic happens. Right, that's really all I have to do.
But it's also intimate.
Even if there were no presentations, it wouldn't matter. The value of the summit would be tremendous. But I'm also a total event snob. I've been to so many conferences, it's not even funny. I worked for an events management company selling software. So all of the things I hate about most events, I've taken them all out. I'm allergic to hotel conference rooms. So you know the Alamo Drafthouse. For those who don't, we do this event in a full-service movie theater. As of last year, the chairs now recline. There's a menu at your seat. There is a server who will bring you whatever you want to eat or drink at any point during the event. The presentation's on a movie theater screen, so it's really easy to see.
I love that.
And it's comfortable. And then the most important thing, of course, we're going to take people out to barbecue in Austin. But too many people, when they build events, they think the content is the most important thing. It's not. We've talked about the relationships. If you create an event and cram it full of content, there's no time to have those serendipitous hallway conversations. So the way I build this agenda, and we're also salespeople, we have like the attention capacity of a large goldfish.
You're
maybe
so
maybe
right.
a small goldfish, maybe a fly.
Yeah.
So I work everything in 2-hour blocks. So it's 90 minutes of content and then 30 minutes of networking.
Good.
And so one, you get time to actually process what you just heard and talk it through with other people. And then there's things that we'll do where we're taking what we just heard and actively through these conversations figuring out how do we incorporate this into our own process to make ourselves better. That's the game.
I was just at the National Speakers Association with Tom Singer, and I will just validate that I love the content. It was really great, but the magic happened in between when I was connecting with people, making these serendipitous connections, having conversations that sparked ideas and possibilities, and that was powerful. So it's great to hear that at your event, that's how it's going to be, and that you've designed the content to be friendly to the folks who have the attention span of a goldfish. So, okay, I have just a couple more final questions. First off, one is just practical and tactical. What is the date of the event? I'll put the information in the show notes, but like when it's in Austin and when? Yep.
So October 7th and 8th. We always do it typically the first or second week of October. And again, timing is really intentional. It's early in the month. It's early in the quarter, right? Like I don't want to disrupt people, and it's a Monday, Tuesday. So most folks travel on Sunday. We do a nice little welcome reception that evening, and then please don't leave until Wednesday because we'll have a great after party Tuesday night.
Oh, sounds fun. Now, the second to last question is around Brandon Fluharty, who's going to be speaking. You said his intentionality is next level, and that means a lot from someone as intentional as you. So just a little teaser on what makes him special, like what folks might expect to learn from him at a high level.
That's a great question. Let me speak a little bit more broadly because I think Brandon is definitely going to kick this off and speak to this. But as I was alluding to before, some of this, and I'm actually going to do. I had a shower thought this morning around the summit is about structural success and systemic success. And I haven't fleshed these out entirely, but if you go to I have another podcast called Daily Sales Tips. It's much shorter.
Cool.
I'm going to put both of these ideas into these tips. And so the structural idea is real success is very fundamental and foundational. It's not, the analogy I have kind of banging around in my head is this is not, I'm going to try and create additional throughput and additional ability by restriping the pavement and putting some new paint down. It's no, we're going to build a whole new overpass. And you can't neglect your bridge so that it collapses into the body of water below, kind of a thing, right? So what I know Brandon will lay the foundation for is how do you think about this more holistically? And it's also a space where I think too often we get too heads down in our current roles and we don't take the time to look up and think, where do I want to be in 5 years, in 10 years, and in 15 years? And am I doing things right now that are going to put me on that type of a path? So a lot of the content is we're going to get into health stuff. Like we're going to talk about the mental health, the mindset, making sure sales doesn't crush you under the weight of the pressure so that you can thrive over time. Because again, you don't get to do this for 25 years if you burn out and die in 3. So those are the types of things. And again, you've got people who are actually doing it. This isn't theoretical. Brandon in multiple years had 7-figure W-2s and is very clear about this is the process. This is exactly how I did it. This is the things that you need to do to get yourself in a position where that's even possible. Because it might not be possible in your current role. So then what are the steps that are going to get you there? What type of success do you need to demonstrate in your current role that are going to get you to the next level so that you can be in a position to change your life?
So the attendees who see Brandon are going to learn about what it takes to holistically succeed, including looking at mental health and sustainability, and get a glimpse into what it takes to actually make seven figures. The fact that that's possible is just very exciting. So talk about a valuable look under the hood for the highest of high performers. So excited for the conference coming up, or the summit, right? Yep. My last question is more personal. Your daughter just started college, right? Like, how was that? What was that like, dropping her off? And just kind of wrapping up more broadly on, like, what have you learned from, building a family? Because I'm a 31-year-old single guy with a puppy, and I'm actually curious. So let's pull on the heartstrings a bit to wrap it up.
Yeah, totally. So the first thing I'll say is time flies. Like, how it is possible that I have an adult child, which sounds like an oxymoron.
You did it, man. Like, what an accomplishment.
It is absolutely crazy to me, because I feel sort of mentally in that place. First of all, if you don't have kids, you're going to feel like, oh, I'm not ready yet. You never have a feeling like you're ready, even after it happens. Yeah. And I feel like that's kind of where I am. I'm like, I'm not quite sure that I'm even ready for children, and now I somehow have one in college. So that's kind of how that goes. I heard I'm going to disclaim this as hard as I can, because I heard this 20 years ago, and it has effed with my head ever since. So if you don't want to be mind effed, maybe just stop listening now. Go to top1summit.com or top1.fm. Yeah. Check out that stuff. Turn this off, because I'm going to totally mess with you. Andy Rooney said that life is like a roll of toilet paper. And the closer it gets to the end, the faster it goes.
Oh.
And I heard that when I was like in my 20s, and it freaks me out because time was going fast then. So the first thing is just like, it's unbelievable to me how quickly that time has gone. What's been really interesting, so my youngest daughter is starting her junior year in high school this year, captain of the cheer team, the whole thing. She's amazing.
Getting good grades,
4 AP classes. I mean, it's crazy. She has. I was not a driven student.
Yeah.
I'm very competitive. I have lots of drive. It was never applied in that way when I was younger. Yeah. It's so cool to see her have that competitiveness and that drive and the way that she's applying it. What's been so interesting to kind of impart for them and show them and teach them, even in the college process, is the value of relationships and helping them understand. So even through kind of the college visitation process, I took my older daughter we went to Missouri S&T. And again, not the right fit for her, a little too small, a little too remote. But we sat down for like an hour with the dean of the engineering to college. And being able to show her and help her understand that when you have these types of relationships, because she was asked, she wanted to do research. And they didn't really have like a whole lot of research that they were doing. But he told her, he said, look, if you have a relationship with your professors and you just ask for those things, then you can have any of those opportunities. So, and we've created with both of them a number of those types of things, and they've been able to see for themselves, like, wait a minute, it's not hard for me. My youngest daughter, she had a summer school class and got stuck on some stuff and reached out to the professor, and the professor, this is a remote thing. He's like, you're the first person I've talked to. So realizing that you can have that relationship, all you need to do is reach out, and nobody is unreachable. The thing to this day frustrates me about the podcast, people are afraid. Scott's inaccessible. He has this huge podcast. BS. Send an email to scott@top1.fm. You'll get a reply.
Yeah. There you have it.
Most people are that way. Chris, if one of your listeners reaches out to you and says, hey, I got this from the podcast, or I'd love to have a quick conversation, is that okay?
It makes my day.
Exactly.
You know?
So you can have any of those relationships, and if you can be specific and clear about what you want, you're going to get it. People want to be able to help you. So being able to see that in action and see them benefit from those things is amazing. And just being able to see the lessons to where I didn't tell her to reach out to that professor. That she's now experienced this enough times on her own to go, oh, I get how it works now. It works.
Wow. Are you kidding me? This was an amazing conversation. Thank you for your generosity with your energy, your insight. You showed us what's possible. So final calls to action. Like, I could steal your thunder, but like all the places people can find you, we'll link the summit, but just round us out with the calls to action.
There's one place. I mean, go to the show notes, go look for the resources that Chris and his team has put together for you here. But if you go to top1.fm, the number one, TOP, the number one.fm, you'll find links to literally everything. So both podcasts, the summit, you'll have to dig a little bit for the productivity stuff, but it's all there. Go to the About section, send me an email, say hi, connect on LinkedIn. It's all good.
Thank you so much for your time. And to the audience, thank you for showing up. And as Scott said, for investing in your personal and professional development. It says a lot that you tuned in. So to your success in tech sales and in life, happy selling and happy living. And we'll see you in the next one.